Hello all, good evening. I'm Sonal Pandey, research scholar from IIT Indore and project leader of TM Vice Review March 2021. This is our fourth issue with memoirs and essays on six wonderful talents from Indian cinema whom we lost in 2020. It is our attempt at paying tribute and farewell to these legends and artists. And for this series of talk, today we are going to focus on the most iconic actor of Indian cinema, Mr. Irfan Khan, a legacy, a poetry. And for this session, we have with us our esteemed panelist, our mentor for this issue, Dr. Rosie Thomas. She is the director of the Center for Research and Education in Media and Arts and co-director of Indian Media Center and professor of film studies at University of Westminster. She has also her monograph published, Bombay Before Bollywood, Film City Fantasies. And with us, we have our moderator for this session, Mr. Shantanu Chaudhuri. He's an editor at HarperCollins Publishing India and is responsible for launching the cinema, culture, and music list in Indian publishing and cinema imprint. He has a book published, Icons from Bollywood. And we have with us our contributors for this essay, mm, Dr. Pathak. He's a founding faculty of sociology at South Asian University and has contributed the essay Anand, Irfan, and Iman Illich to Death with Love. And Dr. Mousumi Banerjee. She is an associate professor and head of Department of English and at English and Foreign Languages University, Shillong, and has contributed the paper The Legacy of Sergeant Fernandez in Lunchbox, The Art of Mastering History in Opera Times. Listeners may please note that these essays are available on worldwide on Amazon and Kindle services. And now I'd request our moderator, Mr. Chaudhary, to take it from here and ask our mentor and contributor their perspective on the legend. Mr. Chaudhary, please.
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you, TMYS, for this privilege and the opportunity to be part of this wonderful initiative to honor and pay tribute to all these artists who have left us this past 1 year. Thank you, Coral, for this opportunity. Rosie, very good to be connecting with you, Dave, Moshumi, and I do hope, I'm sure we'll have with the kind of two essays that we have uh, on the basis of which we're going to conduct this session, and with Rosie mentoring those two essays, I'm sure we'll have a wonderful session try which we'll try to get a sense of what Irfan Khan, as I was talking just before the session, it still hasn't sunk in, to be talking of somebody like Irfan in the sense of an afterlife. That's, I think, the saddest part of it, and I simply can't sort of get over that. I'll all of us will probably have a minute or two to talk about what we're going to talk about. I want to keep this session a very sort of interactive session where I don't have to put forward any questions in case anyone has a point of view to uh, uh, forward during the discussion. We'll keep it open. That way, anybody can come in at any point of time. I'll have a few questions for each one of you. I'd like to start, Sonal, if you permit me, with a poem, with a very favorite poem of mine, and which Coral also knows is a very favorite poem of mine, and it's by Rainer Reike, and it goes, if I may, I have my dead, and I have let them go, and was amazed to see them so contented, so soon at home in being dead, so unlike their reputation. Only you return, brush past me, loiter, try to knock against something so that the sound reveals your presence. It's a line that I've often thought of in the last year. It's often come back to me in the midst of a lot of deaths. It's just not. But I think Irfan's passing has meant a sort of very personal thing, though I did not know him personally, but he was the sort of actor who transcended the screen to become a part of your life. And on that note, maybe we can start off. Rosie, I'd like to start with you because, Dave and Moshmi each have a certain aspect to cover, but you are aware of, you are mentoring the two essays, and I'd like you to sort of, we'll cover the legacy, the death, the life, and his approach to death. But coming to you first, your take on these two essays and on Irrfan Khan, just as a brief introduction.
Okay, thank you, Shantanu, and thank you to everyone who's made this event possible. It's a great privilege to be part of it. I'd like to, hang on, I've just got myself, I haven't got anyone else, okay. So I'd like to begin by reiterating how terribly, terribly tragic it is that we're talking like this about Irrfan Khan, who was, without a doubt, my favourite of all the Bombay actors. He's someone who I met a few times. I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times in towards the end of his life. But I've enjoyed his films since The Warrior, which I was, I knew Asif Kapadia. He was actually a student at Westminster before he made that film. And The Warrior really was a film that changed something very fundamental, both for Irrfan himself. It's the film that actually started to get him noticed, both within Bollywood and outside. And it's the beginning of Indian films actually really experimenting with form and making a mark in an international way. Unfortunately, we, one essay, two essays can't cover everything. And so I would like to begin with talking about Mousumi's essay. I don't know whether there's any way that I can actually see Mousumi while I'm talking. All I can see is myself, which is a bit disconcerting. Is it? Ah, thank you. Yeah, so I'd rather talk to everyone rather than myself. Yes, so Mousumi, this is a really lovely analysis of The Lunchbox, which of course is a film that Irrfan was completely in his element by then. It's a film that actually has been incredibly successful here. I was told by a group of regional programmers in the UK, so people that program small cinemas around the UK, that The Lunchbox is one of the absolutely most popular films. So it's, it's not just worked for Indian audiences. It's not just worked for cosmopolitan audiences. It's worked for small town audiences around Europe and America. And I think that's quite phenomenal. I think you make some very interesting, very nice analyses of the train, the wrong train gets one to the right direction, the way in which the story is told so visually and works on metaphorical levels as well as very emotional levels, the metonymic use of the lunchbook, the way symbolism works within a film that's absolutely accessible. And of course, Irrfan's acting style, which by then had become completely, very, very nuanced. He always worked with an understatement. And we've been used to his, the power and intensity of his acting to work on films like Bull, very, very intense, violent films, but actually to use that in a film like The Lunchbox and to be actually so compelling with so little. I mean, I don't want to just keep talking. I wonder whether you would like to just say a little bit more about the acting style, because you say it beautifully in the essay, and I shouldn't tell everybody what you say in the essay. It's better that you say it. So
what I sort of like the first film that I watched of his of Irfan's was something called Kasur, way back, like way back before he was Irfan, and even then he was playing a small time lawyer hustler sort of character in that. Even then, in the 5 minutes that he had on screen, he overshadowed the leads. You could see that, that the way he looked at you, the way he turned his head, the way he sort of said something under his breath, you could see. And then the next film that I watched of his was, before I got to the better ones, like was a film called An, where he's playing this mafia mobster, lives in a dongri like chawl in Bombay, and has a hot-headed brother who believes in shooting first and talking later. And in one classic scene, like this brother is just got lost control and shot a politician, I think. And the way Irfan reacts, "Ye tune kya kar diya yaar?" Like, what have you done? You just don't have any control over it. He's a guy and the way he says it, that film had Akshay Kumar, Shatrughan Sinha, Sunil Shetty, and everybody. But the character you take home with you is Irfan Khan in that sort of extended cameo that he had. So that is what I sort of remember most. And of course, then I came to Warrior, and and yes. What is it, Mochmi, to ask you? What is it about Lunchbox that made you take this app? This is just in a career that he started in 1988 with Salam Bombay. It almost took him 13, 14 years before he got his first big break in 2001 with The Warrior and Hasil, which is what established him in Bombay. That role in Hasil established him. And then, of course, you have Pan Singh Tomar, you have Makbul, you name it. But what is it about Lunchbox that got you so interested?
We can't hear you.
Yes, I was muted, I guess. Okay. Yeah, thanks, Rosie. Thanks, Shantanu. At the beginning, I would like to thank and congratulate Team TMYS, the project leader, being Sonal, and the project being the brainchild of Coral. First, on the successful completion of the March 2021 issue on artists and their afterlives, and then on organizing the series of conversations on the artists under discussion in this project and their remarkable works, which have brought all of us together to discuss issues that we normally do not find in deliberation these days, either academic or otherwise. So cheers once again to this novel endeavor of the TMYS team. What got me into this particular, film and its interpretation is, for the purpose of my work entitled The Legacy of Sergeant Fernandez, the Art of a Master Thespian of our Times, I've attempted to kind of reflect on the film for us, to bring to mind the reminiscences of an actor par excellence, and a film that had touched the hearts of millions and that sincerely speaks of man's struggle to earn a livelihood. This is also a film that is perhaps, to my mind, of course, one of the most readerly texts, apart from it being an equally writerly text as well. Amongst all of the oeuvre of Irfan, who by the sheer brilliance of his acting became the face of every single human individual of the modern day world. And his character in the film, called Sergeant Fernandez, who has to pass through a self-corroding ordeal for survival, became the epitome of strength and will that man is inwardly sort of capable to break the shackles of his mundane existence and champion the cause of love and self-emancipation. Now, this is one of those films, I think, that leads us to think long after it has been experienced and to have an idea of what a good piece of cinema is and does. It'll remain as one of the most honored and archived works of the actor, which will live on as long as we do. I have sought to, in a way, interpret it not only for the sheer brilliance with which the story is communicated to its spectators, but also for the perceivable innocence that marks the entire process of storytelling, thereby generating that empathy and humane realization that are afforded by it. The film, too, like any good piece of literature, I mean, that's precisely one of the main reasons why I've chosen to work on this, because it appeared to me as not only a film, but a good piece of literature that not only does baffle us by the very ingenuity and sincerity with which the story is communicated to us, but also does make us feel all the more inquisitive about the supposed finality of the story. It somewhat ends like a short story. It has a sudden ending and has, a multiplicity of interpretations can be given to it. The filmmaker leaves us, therefore, and that is how, with an entire gamut of possibilities to which the conclusion of the film lends itself to. One does not cease to start thinking long after the film ends, leaving him speculating on the lives of Ela Sehgal, that was brilliantly portrayed by Nimrat Kaur, and Fernandez hereafter, Irrfan himself.
Yeah, it's an open-ended film in that way.
Absolutely, it's an open-ended text and so modern in itself, and also the kind of language that is used. I mean, it's the minimal use of language that has gone into the film, and that is so very symbolic, as Rosie was so aptly pointing out. And these silences, I think, are extremely revering in the film. They are emblematic of certain gaps, that need perhaps for the audience to fill in, right?
Yes, in fact, even Warrior, for that matter, is a film that had very few lines, spoken lines. It's a film that sort of revels in its silences. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember it right after all these years, I think it's a film that even Warrior, and that's where I think Irrfan scored, because he didn't need lines to communicate that inner self of the character.
Yeah, and you would notice this element of intense psychologism also. You see, I mean, none of the characters speak, and the epistles, that are being exchanged between the two characters, that is Ela and Fernandez, also are in a way presented as metaphors of absent lovers. And representing the desire to meet. But that meeting remains elusive, because in the film, you see, when the characters come to plan to meet, ultimately it so turns out that they don't come to meet, because, Fernandez suddenly becomes very conscious of his age and thinks that, he is not suitable for as young and beautiful a lady as Ela. And that is why, avoids her. And that angers, of course. I mean, that eventually irritates Ela, of course. But I mean, that's the beauty of the film. I mean, it's so less of language. It's an apparent understatement of life, and yet, it fills in those gaps so remarkably by just giving out certain symbolic indications for the audience to understand, right? Because in the end, you see, I mean, if you remember the end, where the lovers actually don't meet, and it's absolutely on the audience to
take away whatever you can,
take away, yes, because Fernandez actually sets out to meet Ela, being accompanied by the Dabbawalas, And there is this possibility, there is this hope. The film ends with that note of hope. It's not so bleak and dark all throughout. I mean, it ends with that hope, and possibly, you see, someday we can find a sequel to The Lunchbox where
No,
we,
I really
we
hope not. I really
yeah.
hope not. I want to live with Sajan the way he left us in that last scene. I don't think
Yes,
a sequel will ever
absolutely.
measure to that.
Yeah, and the
Just
use of
one,
music. Yeah.
yeah. Just
And
to bring in,
two very
yeah.
important things, that is the use of music and the element of voice acting. If you remember one particular character called Mrs. Deshpande,
Yes, yes, Bharti,
she
Bharti
voice
Achrekar.
acts throughout. You don't see
Yeah,
her, right?
yeah.
But
Which is
she
a
acts as catalyst throughout. Yeah.
which is a wonderful device, sort of through intriguing device that sort of opens up the film that way. Bringing Dave into the conversation, uh, uh, Lunchbox may have left us with a sort of with our own narratives to create regarding the end, the open-ended nature of it, but your essay sort of leaves us with no such avenues. It's a wonderfully titled piece, Anand, Irfan, and Ivan. So, like, how did you come upon that as a sort of, if you could talk through us a little bit about Anand, Irfan, and Ivan. Like I can't get that title out of that heading out of my head. Hello, Dave, can you come on, please? Yes, Dave, please come on. Dave, can you hear us? I think is there some. Hello, uh, I. Um, so, like, I think there's some problem with Dave's connectivity there. I think Rosie, if you could come in before we ask Dave. Dave, just to recapitulate, I was intrigued by the title of your piece, Irfan, Ivan, and Anand. Anand, Irfan, and Ivan. So, and I wanted your take on how you came to that essay and what it took, your understanding of Irfan and his final moments, his final few months. Dave, can you hear us, or Rosie? You mentioned you had a few things to say about this particular essay and his life and his approach to death.
I do, but I'd quite like him to be hearing it. So perhaps can we investigate? Dave, you seem to be mute. I think you can't hear us. Okay. Yeah. I mean, maybe we should move to keep off the topic of Dave's essay till he can come back in with us.
Yes, I think that will be good.
Yeah,
I'd like to sort of keep this then for the time being between Mousumi and Rosie, because one of the things we are talking about the legacy of the legacy of Irfan is the sort of actor he made possible in Bombay cinema. If you look at him in 1988 and right through, he's not the chiseled chocolate face, six pack. He's never been that sort of, but that didn't prevent him from being from sort of transcending that. Do we have Dave? Dave, can you hear us?
Yes. Now I
Yeah.
can.
So we'll come back. We'll come back to this. That's a thought I must. So Dave, what we were talking about before we lost you for a bit was the very interesting title to the essay you have. Anand, Irfan, and Ivan. And unlike the open-ended nature of Lunchbox, which leaves the viewer with his own interpretation, there is something final about. There's a finality about this essay that leaves us with no way but to accept what is. If you could take us through the process of, articulating what you have done with the essay and your approach to Irfan's last few months.
Yeah. So my my journey through Irfan's filmography is a little corrupted. I would say with certain kind of creative ambition. We have all grown up watching Irfan, just like we grew up watching other actors. But then many of us, as admirers, as fans, also have deep voyeuristic interest, if I can use the word voyeuristic here. We want to understand how the actor is in real life as well as real life. We try to interconnect filmography with the biography of actors. It's that larger frame, one can say it's the cultural sociology frame, in which biography and artworks of an artist intersect. And in that context, while revisiting Irfan's work, one realizes that it's not just the actor, his full personhood is also found at work. And probably that was the reason why, Shantanu, you tried to point out as to how his silence also was a kind of speech act in some of the films that you were referring to, be it Lunchbox and even in Pan Singh Tomar, popular films as well as some of those typical art cinema. His silence spoke, right? It had, in Life of Pi, I mean, on so many occasions, so one can go on referring to the filmography, but my point was that the personhood of actor was very vivid in his work, and it acquires more palpable manifestation when one begins to listen to him going through the medical process. It's not just transparency; it's also a reflection of the kind of metaphysics that emerges from an actor's real life. And here, metaphysics is not necessarily a philosophical humbug. It's a very real metaphysics. It's real in the sense that medicine, medicalization does not eclipse the deeper nuances that emerges from the experience of a person. That part really takes me backward, not only into the filmography of Irfan, it also takes me backward to the whole cultural history of our experiences as far as living and dying is concerned. We have, I mean, Ivan becomes a very easily accessible point for referencing, but there are many scholars who have, even in literature, Tolstoy, you referred to the poem of Rilke, and likewise many other poets, so-called romantic poets. They all gave us large ambit in modern literature to take note of some of those physical realizations which we encounter. So his letters, his messages toward the end of his life, along with his filmography, a site of exploration for him, which could play a very important role for us, particularly because we tend to have an imagination of death and dying, largely determined by
I was very touched by what he says in a couple of those messages that you have referred to. If you could sort of read them out, where he talks about this journey and the TC, the I think we have lost Dave's voice there. I think we'll come back to Dave once, if Sonal, if you could just check that. Dave's not audible here.
I think he doesn't know.
Yeah, Rosie Mousumi, can we sort of talk about the other
Yes.
aspect till
Yeah.
Dave comes back? You know,
Uh,
like
he's back.
what I was.
I think he doesn't know he's muted. Can he unmute?
Yes, but he seems to be continuing to talk. I think he's not able to hear us. That is the problem. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But again, he's now unmuted, but yes,
Yeah,
he has
Can you
lost
hear me?
connection.
Hello?
yeah. Hello, Dave.
Can you hear me?
Can you can you hear us?
Yeah. No, something is
Yeah,
happening with the network. I'm so sorry. This is the life, network life, the limits of network life.
yeah. So no, Dave. Just as we lost you for the last bit there, but as I sort of started pointing out, there are a couple of messages there that sort of break the heart in terms of like where he's saying, it's like I'm on a train and the TC comes in and says it's time for you to get off, or where he says, in my hospital, from outside my window I can see MCC, and and it doesn't do anything for me. Like, would you like to talk about these two messages and what he's trying to, or trying, because you were trying to make some sense of those last months of his life, what he's going through, and being handed this lemon, as he says, like at times you don't even want to make a lemonade. You may have been handed over, if life's handed you a lemon, but you don't want to make a lemonade. What do you do? So that I found very sort of heartbreaking in a way. And so if you could elaborate on that, on those two or three messages to sort of get us into his thoughts in those final months.
Hmm. So if I'm audible, it seems I'm frozen again. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are audible. You are audible.
Yes. So uh, yes, for the living, for those who are not yet there, for those who are not dealing with the nuances of that experience of someone who is undergoing that particular phase of journey, probably it would all appear just heartbreaking. Of course, there is the larger theater of life itself has so many such moments when one comes across experiences very heartbreaking, very heart wrenching. Someone will say that is pessimistic, but then I do not take it that at that face value. Uh, his words, his articulations are of another level of realization, where one has seen the two roads, as we have referred to, the two roads running parallel, and one has referred to the experience of the finality, the finality of journey. Somewhere it is going to end, and one does not feel. One is trying to transcend that. The pang of this finality. If all of us have that, not only fear of death, we also have all sorts of other emotions attached with death and dying. But then our cultural trope has also given us a broader idea of death and dying. And I suppose when Irfan is describing his experiences in the last few days, he is taking us back to that larger cultural trope of the experience of death and dying, which we may have become oblivious of precisely because we are guided by variety of forces. Say, for example, insurance market or medical insurance market, or not only that, also cosmetic industry, the glamour industry, uh, the medical establishment may determine our idea of death and dying. Irfan is taking us back to the larger cultural trope in which mythology and history came together, in which modernity and non-modern wisdom came together. Uh, we usually expect very elderly folks to tell us those things. Irfan, through his experience, is trying to share that ultimate wisdom, which we may have become forgetful about, also because we have all sorts of negative notions of death lying around us. I mean, there are
In fact,
scholars who have
Yeah, that's a very interesting thought, like elderly people reminding us of these aspects, but here it is somebody. And Rosie, I'd like to just bring you in the conversation here. One of the most difficult parts of this particular accepting Irfan's passing has been the fact that 53 isn't, like, of course, life and death, one has no, like, there's a saying in Bengali, Janmo Mrityu Biye Dhata Ke Niye, life, death, and marriage is all about destiny. But then with Irfan, this happens at a time when he's just about at the pinnacle of his powers. Like in the last 5 6 years, he's been unstoppable, and he's sort of trying his with his craft, he's breaking through barriers in Hindi cinema in terms of what the hero in Hindi cinema, he is the attraction on his own. He gets a Angrezi Hindi medium to box office glory. Almost, he is with Deepika Padukone and Amitabh Bachchan in Piku. Yet he is the one who is sort of the sinus, the center of attention, because every time he comes on, there's friction happening. So I think that's the hardest part of accepting that this guy, this person, this actor had to go at this point of time, which is life at its most unfair. Please come on in with on
Yeah.
your take on Dev's essay and this
Yeah.
particular aspect.
I think it clearly was a remarkable thing for Irfan to do, to announce in that letter to the world that he had this cancer. Most Bollywood stars don't do that. And he was always an extraordinarily honest person. He was someone who never hid his thoughts and his feelings. And that's why he was such a great actor. He had a very, very direct, some of his directors talk about a childlike curiosity and a desire to embrace whatever life throws at him in this very direct way. And I can say from having met him just a few times, he was a very extraordinary person. He had a manner that was, you don't often get that directness, that honesty, that humanity, and also that humility. It was an extraordinary combination. And so it's sort of no surprise that his attitude to his own death would be so refreshingly honest, so refreshingly open. He announces it. He announces his cancer at the start. I think Dave's essay, drawing so neatly on the letter, that it was around June 2018 that that letter was published in various places, including Times of India. And in fact, I met him very soon after. We had a lunch with his family around that time in London. And at that point, there was great optimism. He had been through the experience in St John's Wood, and the tests seemed to be showing that the cancer was under control. And it was extraordinary how he wasn't in denial at all about it. He knew that it was uncertain, but that he would embrace life at the moment. I think it's interesting, the essay. It's tempting to say he didn't resist. He resisted the medical model. I don't think that's completely true, because actually the family did, and he did actually go to whatever medical solution might be feasible, whatever money could buy. But I think throughout it, he kept that attitude to life that underpinned his whole acting, meant that he did have a very unusual relationship to his own mortality and to his own death. I think it's interesting in the essay, Dave, you mention a number of European philosophers, but also a number of Indian philosophers, including J.D. Krishnamurti. And actually, one of the things that occurred to me is that, in a sense, you've got the wrong Krishnamurti there. The person that I know Irrfan was very interested in was U.G. Krishnamurti, who was, I don't know if you know anything about U.G. Krishnamurti, a very interesting man, called a sort of anti-God man.
Yes, yeah.
Mahesh Bhatt was a follower throughout the last 30 years of his life. And in fact, I had met U.G. Krishnamurti with Mahesh in 1981, in the days when Mahesh was a struggling filmmaker, and U.G. Krishnamurti had just come to Bombay. But I'm saying this because around that time when I met Irrfan at that lunch, actually, it became clear that U.G. Krishnamurti was someone that that he and his wife were very interested in. They're friends of Mahesh's. And actually, this philosophy is very much U.G. Krishnamurti. It is the, there is nothing but, death is nothing but exchange of atoms. And you embrace what life is there, and there is nothing beyond. And I thought, actually, if you were going to go back to this essay, you might like to go to look at a little bit more on U.G. Krishnamurti, because I think that would help you to understand how Irrfan, actually, what made him tick. It certainly helped me to understand. When we're over the lunch, somehow I think I was talking about knowing Mahesh in the old days, and they said, "Oh my goodness, U.G. Krishnamurti, yeah, we all talk about him all the time." And so I think that is very much a key to how he was able to actually have this extraordinary relationship to his own.
Yeah, in fact, Dave ends his essay with one of the most sort of acceptance of Irrfan's kind of accepting the situation when he's just about promoting Angrezi Medium, his last film, and he says, "I am with and not so much with you. I wish to promote the film with as much heart as we all made it. But there are some unwanted guests sitting in my body. I'm having conversation with the guests. Let's see what comes out of it. Whatever be the consequence, you will get to know. There is a saying, when life gives you a lemon, you make a lemonade. It sounds good. But when life really puts a lemon in your hand, it turns difficult to make a lemonade out of it. But what is the choice other than staying positive? No matter we are able to make a lemonade or not. And that is the positivity we have employed in making this film. Dave, do you think that sort of, from your understanding of his life and his films, that's the sort of philosophy that he always held, or is this something he sort of came to adhere to as he saw the last few months unfolding?
It's a question to Dave, I think it is.
Dave, yeah, that's a question to Dave.
I can't seem to unmute myself.
Yeah. Dave, if you could you make my question? Could you understand what I was trying to say?
Yes, I have understood. I can't unmute myself.
Yeah. So tell me, please, if you could come in. Dave, are you there?
Yes, I'm.
So we'll come back to Dev again. I think he's experiencing some problems. So let me just come back to.
Shall I just answer that?
Yeah, please,
briefly?
please,
Because
please.
I mean, I don't think it's something that he just came to at the end. I think inevitably there was I think his whole way of being indicated that is how he would approach death. But I think towards the end there was much more of a understandable battle within him between actually having the courage to go through those last couple of years of his life with that, and the fear that we all will face in that situation. So I think it's a mark of the very specialness of his that underpins his whole acting. And maybe this is a point to come back to Mousumi and talk about his acting skills. Yeah.
In fact, the thing that I wanted to bring out here in the next phase is, how he sort of made not being the typical Bombay hero a part of the narrative. He was not exactly the kind of face or physique you'd associate with a Hindi film hero, and yet he is the sort of actor who made it possible for the likes of Nawazuddin Siddiqui, Rajkumar Rao. These are all Irrfan Khan school of, you don't have to be absolutely smashing looking to make it as, and he transcended just through his presence. He sort of, you never thought of, I am reminded of this wonderful story that I heard about, a filmmaker traveling with a taxi driver and coming across a song of Sanjeev Kumar, Thande Thande Pani Se Nahana Chahiye. And the filmmaker, just in conversation, asked the taxi driver, don't you think he's too fat? He's got a big paunch. He doesn't look like a hero. So the taxi driver says, when you look at Sanjeev Kumar on the screen, you don't see the paunch. You don't see his physique is not six pack. You just see Sanjeev. You just see an actor, a character. Do you think that was true of Irrfan, and that's his lasting legacy? Both Mousumi, I'll come with you, but Rosie, I'd like you to come on in after Mousumi has had her say. Do you think that's his legacy, and how much of that do you think will Bombay cinema sort of take forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's so very true. I think. I mean, following your suit, I would say that he can really seldom be thought of as one of the characteristic stars of the film industry. A position usually held by those who looked like a typical Bollywood hero, as it were. So, and also another interesting fact was he was neither from any so-called Bollywood royal family, as it were.
Yeah, he had no godfathers here.
Yes, he had no godfather. So, so I think he not only looked like the guy next door, but also enacted the guy next door, or the Indian everyman, as I was saying, in his films. And another thing that is, is really striking about his persona is that apparent diffidence in him, as some critics describe his histrionic demeanor to be, in fact. And that apparent diffidence actually charmed his audience, I think. And his extraordinary ability to perhaps adopt that unassuming disposition, as it were, and it is this versatility that took him from, let's say, from the beginning, the theater to television to Indian cinema, and then beyond to international productions over nearly a 30-year span. So, so of course, I mean, his richly nuanced characters, for instance, in terms like the namesake, then Slumdog Millionaire, Pan Singh Tomar, of course, Life by the Lunchbox for sure, Madari, Kareeb Single, so and many more, in fact, are to be of course, remembered forever. But the lunchbox, you see, I mean, I am actually gravitated towards the lunchbox more often than not. And you would see that happening in my discussion very often. So this film is, of course, one of those works in which he perhaps, I would say, if I may, in fact, he hasn't acted at all because he did not have to. Right? I don't see any person acting in the film because there was no acting. Because it was just behaving, in fact, in that film. We experienced Sergeant Fernandez on the screen and not Irrfan, the person. He possessed that mysterious level of naturality, in fact, by dint of which he could gradually become the character, I would say, and be the him. Yes. So he could easily, and naturally become the character and be the character. So as we were talking about that transcendental quality in his acting, so he did definitely transcend the I would say the age-old shibboleths of as you were very rightly saying of a so-called six-pack ab heroic figure, and he refused to remain, that's how, confined within the trap of conventional stardom, I would say also. His films, yes, and you would also notice that his films are boldly modern, in fact, and as an actor, I think he never stopped experimenting. And he was fearless, yes. He was fearless about new, let's say, unconceived roles that perhaps a star, quote unquote, a star, would think twice before taking up.
Because I think he'd built up a body of work which did not limit itself to a certain image. He was not concerned with an image that he had to project. I think
Exactly.
that like that limits an actor more than
Yeah.
anything else. An adherence to an image. I have an image. I have to. If I have to throw off my shirt every film, or if I
Yeah.
have to mouth, like, so he didn't have that.
True.
So like Sonal, I'd like you've been part of this. Is there something that you'd like to bring to the discussion? Something that you have for the panelists here to ask? Some aspect that you think we might be missing out on here.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for moderating this session, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. Yes, I do have a few observations and questions of my own. So, my question would be to Ms. Professor Thomas and Mr. Pathak. So, as we observe that actually in Stoic philosophy, apatheia represents equanimity, irrespective of external circumstances and sufferings. So, do you believe that Irfan's the final stages of his life, does he actually embrace this apathy or stoicism rather than how we actually perceive it as sheer optimism?
Should I come in? Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes, you
yes.
are. Please, Dave, coming.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for this very this. I wanted to just add that our day-to-day register creates this kind of divide for us: black and white, optimist, pessimist, good, bad. This is our common register. This is our common language in which we try to represent our experiences. I suppose with those letters that Shantanu read out, some of those very important markers from the letters, uh, we are invited by those words to break free from this everyday register of talking about our experiences. It invites us to take a plunge into a domain of experience which may not be available for everyone every day. It becomes available for some of us who undergo a particular kind of journey. Irfan has undergone that journey, unlike many of us who may have undergone that journey at some point of time, but we did not try to be awakened selves while going through that journey. Irfan happens to be, even though it was with mixed feelings, and that is represented in some of those words, Irfan is awakened self. He is wide awake with his experiences. He is ready to go behind the curtain of consciousness and figure out how he's dealing with those feelings, those encounters at very deep level. And therefore, I felt that it offers us a possibility to recurate a metaphysics which we might have forgotten otherwise. So therefore, I would not like to very simply put it into this, these known familiar boxes of good experience, bad experience, optimist, pessimist. In general, death was not imagined as a very negative experience. It is something to be lived the way we have lived our lives. For many poets and literature, the relation between life and death was very important. With Irfan's letters, we come to recognize that relationship. It has abrupt ends. It has certain kind of sense of sinking in. But then that is why Anand came into picture while going through the letters and revisiting Irfan through biography and filmography. Rishikesh Mukherjee's Anand, which happens to be
Yes. है
my
मौत तू एक कविता है, it's that famous
yes,
line from there. है मौत तू एक कविता है, मुझसे मिलने का एक वादा है.
bilkul. Bilkul. So that resurfacing of a popular mythology happens. That happened in 70s with Rishikesh Mukherjee's Anand. And Anand was not alone. Here with Irfan, I see that Anand and Babu Moshai are embodied in the same body. They're not
That's
separated.
very
Yeah, they're not separated in Irfan. They're all together. Both of them are together in Irfan. Both of them are speaking in Irfan's words, right? And therefore we hear this, whether I should make the lemonade or what should I do with the lemon. Therefore we hear that two parallel roads running across. So therefore I suppose it's more complex than our hasty conclusions about the idea of dying. Irfan has given a golden opportunity, particularly in our time, particularly in the time of pandemic, when for us death has become ubiquitous. It's all around us. It's appearing in all kind of nasty forms to us. In that kind of moment, Irfan, in spite of the pain involved, in spite of the kind of momentary frustration involved, he invites us to rethink our experience of death and dying in slightly broader way. He invites us to rethink our frame which we employ when we are talking about death and dying. We tend to
yeah.
separate death and dying entirely from romance in our day-to-day life, which may not be the case with the poet. And we may not be poet, but we may be poetic. Irfan may not be a professional poet, but he's terribly poetic. He had liking for all kind of poetry. So that was the reason why. I mean, I am just uh, offering bold conjectures through his words, but then that's the job of a fan to be creatively voyeuristic and come up with bold conjectures, and particularly the conjectures which might be helpful for humanity at large. Um, a
Yeah.
superstardom may not be helpful for humanity at large, but but an actors and artists encounter with some of these very complex experiences may be translated into a larger body of metaphysics, philosophy, a body of ideas which we must remind ourselves of again and again.
Sonal, does that answer your question to some extent? I don't think there will be one answer to any of these things that we are discussing, but does that answer? You have any other questions for Rosie or Moshimi?
Yes, sir. So, my question is for everyone. Actually, like Irfan Khan represents a paradigm shift in the Indian cinema. So, because he happens to be in an era of post-liberalization and globalization, and now since OTT, because of OTT platforms, the audiences across the world are actually discovering his work. So, do you believe that, he actually this actually contributed to his fame as an actor to a global audience, and because like it has taken a lot of years for Raghuveer Yadav and Sanjay Mishra, actors like them, to actually have amassed a popular
Mm.
audience, a popularity.
Rosie, could you come in on that, please?
Yeah,
Your understanding of Irfan's contribution to changing the paradigm of stardom and
yeah. I think without a doubt, the paradigm shift is important. I think it's important to remember the breadth of his roles, though. Actually underpinning that broad range of roles, and I mean, what we haven't really talked about are the rather otherworldly, mythic characters of films like Kissa, Song of Scorpions, and to some extent Warrior, to the the more violent characters, to the humour, to the Man Next Door. So, but underpinning all that, it was because he was such an extraordinary actor and had that quiet intensity and very, very mobile face that he could stretch through quite silently. He could stretch across this broad range of roles, and it's a paradigm shift in terms of Hindi cinema hero, but it's also, I think, much more.
So we are at the fag end of this session, and I'd like each one of us, Mousumi, to begin with, one aspect of his life and career that you think has influenced you to sort of look back at his roles, his legacy, his life. If just closing statements from each one of us.
Yes. So as we were talking about the paradigm shift brought about by his genre of acting, it was a class of its own. I mean, he had a style of his own, and which was extremely inimitable because he spoke with his eyes, and particularly you see another aspect of his acting, is constitutive of his eyes. I mean, the expression that lay hidden over there, is absolutely manifold. So I am particularly, stricken by that charisma that he had, and his charisma did not actually lay in any kind of glamour and glitz, as it were. You see, in fact, I wouldn't consider as a hero either. In fact, I mean, it would be a rather defeating term, for him if we say that he was a hero. He wasn't actually. Since he never pursued all the glitz and glamour that's there. That's generally known, I mean, to be associated with his profession. And this is why he and his work could be thought upon so much and spoken and written about. He never attempted to be a hero. His life was dedicated for his art, and he was in that sense a fearless artist. So, and particularly, you see, it may be quite a challenge to remain in Bollywood and not get swayed away, let's say, by the charm and enchantment that it is popularly known to entail. His artistry, therefore, I would say, was intelligent enough to have been able to strike a befitting balance between his art and the glamour and bewitchment of the space he inhabited, both in his real life and his real life. He had, of course, set a new benchmark that way of the fact that it's perfectly possible to remain unassuming and true to one's art and exist in the midst of, perhaps the many allurements of life without being affected by them. And the secret of his deglamorized image, I would say, lay in this detachment that he continuously observed. A detachment that is not possible without a remarkable level of strength, conviction, certitude, and truthfulness of character. Yeah.
Dave, will you come in with your closing comments?
I mean, on Irrfan, there cannot be a closing comment, but for the sake of convenience, one can simply say what attracts me most about the actor and his life is the levels of aesthetics which has emerged from his struggle Uh, he, as a struggling actor who struggled to carve out his niche with his like Mousumi said, very simpleton look, that ordinariness became a source of charm for many of us. That ordinariness was also a very important prop for his performances. The poignance, the power of his performances could be felt precisely because he was very simple in his outlook. So for me, what matters most is this uh, the aesthetic value of work and life. And that aesthetic value, we like it or not, is heavily contingent upon, heavily conditioned by the kind of struggle one has gone through and struggle for what. So he, as a struggling actor, he, as a struggling human being, um, enhances the value of his existence. The kind of ideas which emerge from his filmography as well as his life is deeply soaked and moist because of this, struggle which we associate with him with. Um, so that is that in that domain of struggle, one also realizes with Irfan that pain and pleasure can come together. They are not necessarily separable entities. That's very important for me. I mean, we have learnt about it from variety of sources, and learning about it from one of your favorite actors' life and work is immensely joyful thing. Particularly in a time, and this is the second part. Particularly in a time when we find that everybody in the glamour industry is in a hurry and competition to be successful, glamorous Twitterati, and Twitter handles are used for all sorts of things. In that kind of time, we find that somebody is offering us profundity, right? Is not in a hurry to vend something or else about anything or everything under the sun. Instead, he is very choosy. He's very selective about what he would like to talk about, and yet he's very progressive. If one values that kind of value orientation, to take on any kind of orthodoxy, be it in cinema industry or in day-to-day life. So that matters to me. I mean, in a time when there are too many role models performing roles without performing as models without significant roles, in that kind of situation, Irfan was certainly an oasis, which will be cherished for a long time.
Rosie, you come in with your sort of takeaway from his life, and
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we have to remember is the immense skill and in his craft, that he never stopped refining and learning. I know when he was in London, he would go to the theatre. He was very engaged in the craft of acting, and made it look so simple. But there was immense skill there. And I think I'd like to end with a very nice story that his director, Anup Singh, the director of Kiss and Song of Scorpions, told of one of his Irfan's favourite pastimes was flying kites. So when they were in the desert, he'd wander off between shots, and they could always see where he was because there'd be a kite flying somewhere. And he apparently said, well, flying a kite is, you think you can control it, and then you really can't. And the kite is responsive to every little gust of wind. And that's really what acting is all about. And I think that's a just beautiful story of that immense skill, minimalism, but with extreme intelligence about it.
Thank you, Rosie. That was, I don't think we can do justice to somebody like him, even if you're talking hours. I began with a few lines by Rilke, and I'll just end with that before I hand over. For this suffering has lasted for far too long. None of us can bear it. It is too heavy. This tangled suffering, which, building on conventions like a habit, calls itself just and fattens on injustice. Are you still here? Are you standing in some corner? You knew so much of all this. You were able to do so much. You passed through life so open to all things, like an early morning. I think I have been reminded of a lot of people in the past year through the poems of Rilke, and I can't think of anybody more appropriate for these lines than Irfan, and what he meant to us as an actor, as a human being. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rosie, for those wonderful insights. Dave,
Thank you.
very sad to read, but very illuminating your article. And Moshmi, I really look forward to other pieces on other films of Irfan Khan in the coming times, because your essay on Lunchbox was absolutely uh, a brilliant piece of original work on of analysis. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, TMOS, and Sonal, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary. I remember from one of Irfan Khan's interviews where he reflected that a very few consumers are actually able to differentiate between good scripts and good performances. But I believe he was an exception to this rule because he not only actively chose to star in good scripts, but we can't imagine him without him not being in those roles. Be it Pai Patel in Life of Pi, or be conveying the idea of letting go, or be it Rana's empathy in Piku, or uh, Sergeant Fernandez reflecting on transience of human memory and mortality in Lunchbox. I wish that we as audience remember him in this way, and this is one of the many ways that we actually cherish his contribution towards the field of cinema. And on behalf of TMYS, I would like to pay my deepest gratitude to Professor Thomas for being the mentor for this special issue, to Mr. Chaudhary for moderating the session, and for Professor Banerjee and Professor Pathak for contributing their wonderful and insightful essays on the legend. And I would also again like to remind our listeners that they can actually access this essay on Kindle services and Amazon worldwide. And thank you all. It was a wonderful session with you, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Thank
wish
you,
we never
everyone.